Good morning. It's great to see everybody here this morning. If you'd like to grab a Bible and flip over with me to Luke chapter 8, starting in verse 40. Luke chapter 8, starting in verse 40. You ever been busy at work? I love asking those questions because people go, oh, yeah. It happened. Those days, I'm not just talking about busy work, but those days that hit where just every minute of every day just seems to be locked down to doing something. It's just those days in which you just can't seem to catch up. And no matter how much you get done, there's still a pile of stuff over here that still needs your attention. I used to have days like this when my kids were in preschool. My kids were in preschool in New Mexico, and they went to a place called My Little School, which was a preschool designed to help them get ready for kindergarten and beyond. But the geniuses in the administration at the particular preschool, knowing that the LupPlace family have two kids that need to go through this program, put them in the two opposite sessions of the day. And so my day would go like this. Sherry would go to work. Like I say, I don't think I'm complaining because poor Sherry, she had to be at work at 5 o'clock at the place that she was working at the time. And just tell me to be quiet and get along with life. But I would wake up, get the kids up, get Sydney up. Sydney had to go to school first at my little school. She had to be at school at 8 o'clock. She was 3, telling me what she was going to wear to school that day. Yeah, I can't wait for the teenage years. But so we had to get Sydney ready for school and get Sydney to school at 8 o'clock. In which, since I had to get Sydney ready for school, I had to get Ethan up so that he could go with me. His session's not until the afternoon. So we would get up, get Sydney dressed, get her teeth scrubbed, get her hair done because Dad had to do it. And yeah. I'm like the guy who would put zip ties in their daughter's hair to do ponytails. Yeah, that was kind of my speed when it comes to doing hair. And get her to school, and then turn around and take Ethan, who was 4, to work with me at the office. So I'm doing the stuff I need to do at work with my 4-year-old child that I need to keep out of everything. And he would go visiting with me and do everything that he could with me. And so we would do that until 11. So then, from 9 to 11, I was able to do stuff. Then I had to go pick up Sydney and bring Sydney home and get her lunch and get Ethan lunch and then turn around and take Ethan to school at noon. And then do the same thing now opposite with Sydney. Take Sydney to work with me while I try to finish up for stuff while Ethan's at school for a couple hours. And then turn around and then go and get Ethan back. And then bring him home, and then we're all able to be home. And I did that, or we had to do that. That was our schedule for a couple of years while they were going through this school program. But it was just one of those things that just seems like every time I turn around, I have to do something else. Something else needs my attention. I have to get this kid to school. I got to pick this kid up from school. I got to get this kid dressed for school. I got to make sure this kid gets fed. And on top of that, having my own career. And on top of that, making sure Sherry's okay, because I would also sometimes take her lunch and everything. But it was just those days. Those days. And that we just cannot catch up on. A day like that hit Jesus. And we're going to talk about that day today. In Luke 8, there has been a running theme, and this theme of Luke presenting what humans might call big miracles. But as we've been studying these, the truth is, Jesus performing a miracle was no harder for him than walking across the room to go to the kitchen to get something to eat. I mean, you look at these miracles. We started off this run by talking about Jesus calming the storm. Yeah, we've seen Jesus perform miracles earlier in the book of Luke. But now, Jesus is in a boat with the 12 disciples in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. And this giant storm comes upon, and Jesus silences it with a word. Whoa. We cross the Sea of Galilee, and now there's this guy who's possessed by a legion of demons. Jesus casts them out. and sends them into pigs, they run off a cliff and kill themselves. Whoa. Now, on this next day, we get the last two. The last two miracles. Not of Luke, but of this theme of, again, in human standards, we might call very impressive miracles. But in reality, we're no harder than any of the other miracles in which Jesus performed. And again, there's no more hard for Jesus than Jesus breathing. We're impressed by big displays of power. But really, it wasn't that difficult for the Son of God. In Luke chapter 8, verse 40, it says this. Now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, a ruler of the synagogue, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house, because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. Okay, here's situation number one. Jesus comes back from crossing over from where he was, what we talked about last week, the land of the region of the Gerasenes. So now he's back and the crowd's been waiting for him. And again, there's an interesting dynamic there. Remember last week when he was asked to leave the region of the Gerasenes. They saw Jesus' power. They experienced it. The man who was healed wanted to go with Jesus, but he was the only one. Everybody else who lived in that region said, no, you need to go. I don't know what you're about. We don't know what kind of stuff you're going on, but you need to leave. They were scared of the power of Jesus. Jesus then crosses back over the Sea of Galilee, and the crowds are waiting for him to come back. So now everybody's trying to crowd in on Jesus. This guy, this synagogue ruler, he's a pillar of the community. He has one daughter who's about 12, and she's dying. He fights this way through the crowd in order to get Jesus' attention to bring Jesus home so Jesus can heal his daughter. Parents, as we go through the story, put yourself in the position of Jairus and everything else that's about to happen. There's one man who can save your child. What are you willing to do in order to get him to your house? All right. But that's only situation one. You see, in this account, we have two miracles that are going to take place. One involves Jairus' daughter. The other one involves a woman who has been bleeding for 12 years. It says, as Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. But no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. There's a woman who's bleeding. Now, if we read Leviticus, we find out that a woman who is going through her monthly cycle, a woman who is bleeding, is for that week ceremonially unclean. Can't be around people, or else she makes them unclean. You can't sit on what she said. Just go on down the line. It makes everything she touches, everything she interacts with for that week unclean. This woman has been experiencing it for 12 years. Straight. Imagine what her life's been like. From a health way, yes, but also, right now, social outcast. Can't live normal life. Everything she interacts with, everything she touches itself becomes unclean. On top of the suffering and mental anguish of going through her illness. The other Gospels tells us that she was once a rich woman in which she spent all of her money on doctors and professionals. They could do nothing for her. She looks out the window and she sees Jesus walking by with a crowd. Now, Luke says that this crowd was crushing Jesus. November is next month. Following that is December. Who's looking forward to going to the mall? Yeah. You ever seen a crowded mall? Have you ever been in a crowded mall? You ever worry about who might be bumping into you? This is the attitude. This is the crowd that is going to Jairus' house. We get to see Jesus perform a miracle. Let's go! And the crowds are going. This woman sees this procession going down. And she sees Jesus. And she has a thought. And the thought is, if I can just reach out and brush the edge of His cloak, then I can be healed. Where has that been explained? Where has this been proven? Where has Jesus healed with, here, touch my cloak and you'll be healed? It hasn't happened. Where did she get this information? She couldn't read it. It couldn't be taught because it's not there. There is nothing to show that this type of healing is possible. Nothing. But she has a faith. A faith that says that if I could just reach out and just brush the garment that Jesus is wearing, then I can be healed. She has faith. Now the faith she has is pure faith because that faith leads her to action. That's what faith does. Faith leads us into action. If we have a faith that does not lead us into action, we don't have faith. At least not the faith that God wants us to have. Because faith leads to action. She had this thought that came from I don't know where. And it led her to action. It got her up and it got her to leave her house when in reality we have no idea how long it's been since she's left her house. Goes down into this throng of people. Remember now, she's ceremonially unclean, which means everything she touches and every person she goes around, she makes unclean. She goes down now and she fights her way through this crowd. And she gets, as the artists sometimes envision it, she gets behind Jesus and she reaches out and brushes His garment. And at that point, she's cured after 12 years. Now remember, this is happening in a huge crowd of people. Shoulder to shoulder crowd of people all marching in the same direction. People are accidentally jostling one another. People are bumping into one another and everything. And all of a sudden, Jesus' cloth is brushed and this woman is healed. And Jesus stops and He says this, "Who touched me?" Now remember, when you're in the stores in November and December, and everybody's fighting to get the stuff and the presents and do the Christmas shopping, and people are jostling, not even rudely, but just you bumping into people, just stop in the middle of the store and just say, "Who touched me?" and see what kind of looks you get. That's the point. Jesus is being touched all over the place, but only this one woman was healed. Jesus' cloth is being brushed by everyone who's surrounding Him. But only one woman was healed. Because only one woman had this faith, had this mindset, was down there among Jesus for a reason, for this purpose of being healed. But he asks, "Who touched me?" Now let's think about this. Jesus has been around people before. He's been able to pick out what people are thinking, what kind of hearts they have. Do we honestly think that He doesn't know who touched Him? Of course He does. But what He's doing is He's making a situation. He's stopping the procession. Now again, remember, parents. There's Jairus walking with Jesus with the mindset of, I got to get Jesus to my house in order to heal my daughter who's dying. Desperate emotion going on there. But now Jesus is going to stop the procession to Jairus' house so that He can have a heart-to-heart conversation with this woman. He's making this situation so that He can speak to this woman. So this woman, again, still following this faith, going on this trail of faith, can confront Jesus. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you." I love it when the disciples look to Jesus and they try to talk to Jesus like He's a simpleton sometimes. Jesus will tell His disciples, "You feed the 5,000. They say, "Well, what are we going to feed them with, Jesus?" Here it says, Jesus says, "Well, who touched me?" And Peter says, "Psst, teacher, we're all touching you. What's the big deal?" No, there's something going on. Something's happened. We got to stop and see what's happening. Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at His feet. Now remember, the procession now is stopped. We're not going to Jairus' house right now, okay? But she came trembling and fell at His feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched Him and how she had been instantly healed. And then He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." This section that we're in has lots of lessons in it for us. One of the lessons is the nature of faith and the miracle. It was the faith. In comparison to other miracles in which Jesus was involved with in the Gospels, the healing of the woman, Jesus is actually very little involved. He didn't instigate it. He didn't say, "Here, look here. Let me show you this." He was walking by her house. She took action, got up, left her room, fought through the crowd in order to get up close to Jesus so that she could brush His robes or brush His tunic. So then she could be healed. She did the action. But the action was done because of her faith. We might be sitting around wishing God would perform some sort of miracle in my life. "Oh God, make it real for me. Oh God, do this. Oh God, do that." Are we doing anything ourselves? If we have a faith that God can move mountains, what is our faith leading us to do? True faith, as described in the Bible, leads to action. James will put it, as Vince talked about a few weeks ago, out of James 2. Faith without deeds is dead. Why? Because without deeds, there's no showing that we had faith. Read Hebrews 11 and those great accounts of Old Testament faith that we can read about in that chapter. They all have one thing in common. They involve action. The way they lived. The following of what God told them to do. They all had choices to make. Noah didn't have to build the ark. God wanted him to, and I think we all agreed that it was wise that he did. But he didn't have to do it. He took faith in what God wanted him to do, and that faith led him to the action of building the ark. This woman had faith. That comes from nonsense. Brush Jesus' robe and you'll be healed of a disease that you've had for 12 years in which no medical man in your region has been able to treat? Really? That's your plan. But she had that faith, and that faith led her to action. And so when Jesus says, "Daughter, your faith has healed you, go in peace," what that means is your faith has healed you. Jesus wasn't going to her house to heal her. He's going somewhere else. But her faith led her to Him. And because of that, she was healed. If we're waiting around for God to perform some sort of miracle in our life, we have to ask, do we truly have faith? And what does that mean? A faith that leads to action. A faith that leads to us doing something to show that our faith is really there. Because if we're just sitting on the couch, waiting for God to enter our lives without us lifting a finger, we have missed the point of what God was trying to tell us about pure biblical faith. Faith is a journey. Faith is a path. The life of following our Savior, the life of following our God, is a path. If we're going to get anywhere down a path, we must take steps. We must walk. We must go. We must journey. Journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. But if we never take that step number one, we're not going to go anywhere. And we're not going to do anything. But is the journey worth, or is the cost worth the journey? Yes. This woman who was bleeding for 12 years, if she never left, if she never took the chance, if she never did go out to see Jesus, she would have spent the rest of her life bleeding until she finally died. That was it. She risked, and it was worth it. She had faith that led to action, and she was healed. Her interaction with Jesus led to her being able to live truly and freely for the first time in 12 years. You know, I think about that. My kids aren't even 12 yet. Ethan's 11. I can imagine that. But now she has her life back because of her faith that Jesus can make it better. But let's not forget that there's still something else going on here. You know, we've been talking about Jesus and this woman for a while. Now, Jairus. We've forgotten about Jairus. He's still over here thinking, I have a daughter who's sick, and the day's not getting any longer. What about Jairus? Now remember, parents, Jesus is the only one that can heal your daughter, and now Jesus has stopped to talk to this woman while your daughter is dying. How calm are we now? It might be getting a little tense. But now we're able to move on. In verse 49, it says, while Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. Your daughter is dead, he said. Don't bother to teach her anymore. Oh. Okay, parents, put yourself in that position. Your one hope for your only daughter's life. He was coming. He was on his way. But in your eyes, you might see the fact that Jesus got sidetracked by this woman. And now while you're sitting there rocking on your heels, checking your sundial, seeing how much time is passing by, someone from your house comes to you and says, your daughter's dead. Don't bother him anymore. Gone. The opportunity to save your daughter, gone. That's it. She's in a better place. It's over now. Nothing can be done. You start crying, making an emotional mess of yourself, understandably. And then Jesus looks at you and He says, don't be afraid, just believe, and she will be healed. We should be healed. You don't get healed from death. Healing is for alive people. If you have a sickness, you can get healed. If you have a rash, you can get healed. If you have broken bones, you can be healed. If you're dead, there's no healing from that. That's a burying problem. Death is not a disease in the mind of man. You know, death's kind of a permanent condition. You don't go to the pharmacist for that. But you look at how Jesus is talking. For man, that's the end. That's all, folks. It's over now. Go back to your knitting. But Jesus talks to Jairus as, oh no, we're not done yet. We're just getting started. He looks to Jairus after everybody has just heard this woman talk about the situation, her situation, and touching Jesus and being healed. Jesus now looks at Jairus and he says, don't be afraid. Okay. Just believe, because that was the point of the woman being healed, and she will be healed. Is Jesus implying that He can raise a person from the dead? Is Jesus actually making us think that just because someone has died, that there is still something He can do about it? Death is a serious condition. We don't survive death. But Jesus says, you just wait and believe. Don't be afraid and believe. We're not done yet. It says in verse 51, when He arrived at the house of Jairus, He did not let anyone go in with Him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. Remember, this whole crowd was going. Because the whole crowd was thinking, we get to see something cool. The other gospel accounts tell us that the startings of the funeral has already going on. In the Jewish culture, you could hire people out to mourn at your funeral. Yeah, isn't that a cool way to make a living? Just go to this funeral and cry, we'll pay you. That was already going on. And so when Jesus gets there, He gets everybody out except for Peter, James, and John and the girl's parents. They're going to go in. It says in verse 52, meanwhile all the people were wailing and mourning for her. And Jesus says, stop wailing, Jesus said. She is not dead, but asleep. Now again, imagine going to a funeral. A very emotional funeral. Walking into where they're having the viewing. And going and looking at everybody who is crying and just saying, stop that! What are you doing? Why are you crying? Well, I thought it was fairly obvious. She's not dead, but asleep. Luke doesn't bring it... Oh, no, he does bring it out. Verse 53 says, they laughed at Him. They laugh at Jesus. They laughed at Him knowing that she was dead. People in history, they have been able to figure out people are dead. Okay. Sometimes they hit or miss, actually. There used to be a custom in Victorian England in which they would put bells or an air tube into a freshly dug grave, just in case there was a mistake and someone was accidentally buried alive. But, during the course of history, people have been able to ascertain when someone is dead. And so when they hear Jesus say, this kid is not dead, she's just asleep, there is no reason to cry, they laugh at Him because they know. They know she's dead. They know this. And all of a sudden when Jesus starts saying this, He sounds more like a quack than a respected rabbi or a respected worker of miracles. Doesn't He know that a person's dead when they're dead? He tells them to stop. He sends them out. And then He turns to her. He says in verse 54, very beautiful, but He took her by the hand and said, my child, get up. Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were astonished, but He ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened. He raised her from the dead. Now what's here for us? In this section, Jairus felt pressed for time. Time was the enemy. I gotta go. I gotta find Jesus. I gotta get Jesus back here so that He can do something with my daughter who is dying. She's not dead yet, but we're on the clock. We gotta do this before she dies. Jesus wasn't concerned about time. He had enough. There was enough time. There was plenty of time. There was worlds of time. Because even after she died, she lived. again, in this section of marvelous miracles that Luke put together in Luke 8, they all have a similar element. It doesn't matter how big and scary and intimidating and dark the world can be. It doesn't matter how many evil spirits might be inside of a person. It doesn't matter how long a person has been ill. And it doesn't matter if a person dies. Jesus can fix it. In this world we live in today, it doesn't matter how violent the earth is. It doesn't matter how many people turn against us. It does not matter how dark our country gets. It doesn't matter if our government turns against the Christians. It does not matter. Because we still have God. And He can still make it better. In this passage, we've learned the importance of taking the time. I cannot imagine Jairus over there watching Jesus stopping to have a heart-to-heart conversation with a woman when Jesus knows there's another emergency. Oh, there was plenty of time. There was plenty of time. And on that day, the people who needed to have miracles done had miracles done. And the girl lived. And the woman went home. We freak out about time. It hasn't happened yet. I'm not any better. There's plenty of time. Do we take the time to look to the needs of one another? Do we take the time to be servants to each other as Jesus, the Son of God, stopped to have a conversation with this woman? Do we take the time to be brothers and sisters to each other? We have time. The forms, they'll be done. Our job requirements, they'll be fulfilled. We can take the time to be servants of God. Because in the end, there is nothing to fear for those who walk in faith before God. For the servant of God, for the Christian, for the one who has given himself to God through the waters of baptism to have their sins washed away, to arise a new creature ready for faithful service and a life of faithful living. There is nothing in this world to fear. We will keep going, and the world will keep spinning until Christ comes back. And if we're watching the news and we're fretful of what may happen, if we're watching the debates and we're fearful of who may or who may not be our next president or whatever the case may be, as long as there is life, there is hope. And as long as we're walking, following the trail God leads before us, we'll be okay. We'll be okay. Because we're walking by faith. And faith, while difficult path at times, is the path that we need to be walking. It's taken us where we need to go, which is to be with our Father for eternity. This morning we'd like to offer the invitation to those of you who might be hurting or suffering, to those of you who might not understand the power of faith, or you felt like you might have lost it, or that you felt like you're alone. You're not alone. You're not. God's with us. God wants us to be with Him. God created us. You, me, all of us. He created us that we may be with Him one day. But in order to be with Him, we must be obedient to Him. We must be faithful servants of His. And He wants you to come back home. You might be here today feeling like you're not part of any sort of spiritual family. We would love for you to be a part of ours. We're not perfect, but we're seeking perfection. We're seeking to be family. And we'd love for you to become a part of our family. We would welcome you and embrace you as a member of our spiritual family. Or you might wish to put your Savior on in baptism. Maybe you have never had your sins washed away. Sin is what separates us from God. But God has given us a way in which we can have our sins taken away. So that roadblock, that obstacle between us and Him is removed and we can be with our Father. If you have never had this done, we would love to assist you with that this morning. But whatever needs you have, would you please come down as we stand and as we sing.